All right, part 2. Last session, we kind of had an introduction to worldview, and we're going to talk about worldview. Every discipleship workshop we ever put on here, I'm going to infuse worldview conversations in it, because it's the nature, to be honest with you, of how we do apologetics. Apologetics is defending the Christian faith, and for you to actually be confident in your Christian faith, to have convictions, you not only have to know the foundations that make up your Christian faith, but you have to be able to easily and more quickly interpret other people's worldviews and help them see how their worldviews are not built on solid presuppositions and foundations. So I know it sounds like an overwhelming task, but frankly, I think the more we do this and the more we engage with these questions, you're going to start to build a confidence with it. First session, we talked about creation. Now in the second session, if you got your handouts still, right, you should still have your handouts, plenty more blanks to fill in. We're going to be talking about humanity, and this is going to get really fun. All right, I think this one might even be more fun than the last one. We turn to the doctrine of man, what it means to be man. In this section, we want to understand biblically what a human is and how humanity is unique and set apart from all other parts of God's creation. In this section, we want to understand man's original design before the fall. And in the following section, we're going to look more closely. Thank you very much. And in the following section, we're going to look more closely at the impact of sin on the condition of man. So we're going to look at what was man before sin entered the picture. And then in the very next discipleship workshop we put on, we're going to talk about the consequences of sin. So just to make sure we're clear up front, when we're talking in this session, we're talking about man in our original design before sin entered the picture. So let's read the passage from Genesis chapter 1, key passage, verse 26 to 31. Genesis 1, 26 to 31 reads this way. Then God said, you remember from the first session, that rhythmic beauty, right? So he's finishing up that rhythmic beauty. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them. God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed that's on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that had the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning on the sixth day. All right. First blank. Get your pens out. Man is made in the image of God. Man is made in the image of God. God created humanity in his image. Now, this is a very complex subject, what it means to have the image of God, that we're image bearers of him. And while I won't be able to fully work through all the details of it, I do want to pull out some very important worldview implications for us. A few key pieces. Number one, first important thing of being made in the image of God. Man is distinct from all other creatures. Man is distinct from all other creatures. There is an objective reason why humanity is the dominant species on this planet. There's a reason for it. There's a reason why gorillas have not figured out how to build cell phones. There's a reason why the human brain functions at a much higher degree than any animal even comes close. Just light years between our brain and any other animal's brain. There's a reason for that. God created man in his image. Not just in the way we function as the dominant species of the earth, but in our relationship with him. We have a very unique relationship with God that is different than the relationship a dog has with God, or a bird, or a gorilla. We have a unique relationship with God that is fully realized in the incarnation of Christ. Now think about this. Not only are we in the image of God, but God, when he entered into creation through the person of Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, the Word made flesh, when he came in the body of a human. He did not come in another body. He came as a human to rescue and redeem Humans, we stand as God's special prized possession in this creation. Yes, we are special, right? It's okay. The world wants to tell us we are not special. Humans are special. We are the special privilege of being made in the image of God. We are not the most special. That would be God. He holds that space. However, in the order of God's creation, humans were made in the image of God. This is at odds, of course, let's just call it out. This is at odds with many worldviews that you will encounter in our day and age. Carl Sagan, the famed astronomer Carl Sagan. So many quotes from this man, I cannot even begin. For those of you that are interested, if you know Bill Nye the Science Guy, when I was a kid, Bill Nye the Science Guy was a common thing we do in our science classes in elementary school, and now he's a popular atheistic scientist that likes to kind of bash on Christians. Bill Nye is actually was taught and mentored by Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan says this: "We are," let me pull this up, "we are the representatives of the cosmos. We are an example of what hydrogen atoms can do, given 15 billion years of cosmic evolution." Don't you love? Carl Sagan has a way of writing very, very nicely. As Christians, we reject that worldview, right? As Christians, we reject the worldview. We are not representing the cosmos. It's not who we represent. We represent God. We are in His image. We are not in the image of the cosmos. We are in God's image. Unguided, unpurposeful evolution did not create humanity. Now, this is where it's going to get real fun. So just let's go there for a second. We're going to come back to this topic a few times today. Unguided, unpurposeful evolution did not create humanity. Humanity was created by God, distinct from all other living creatures. I say unguided evolution for a reason, because I want to be very careful here. There are wonderful Christians who try to defend some kind of guided evolution as the explanation of why humans are here. And they try to say, hey, here's how evolution fits into the biblical narrative. I appreciate their effort. I do. I am someone, I don't want to claim to be a scientist. Christians love science. Why? Because God has given us science, the ability to observe the known universe and see the fingerprint of God all around us. We love science, and so Christians are scientists. We are not rejectors of science. And there have been many Christians who have tried to find a way to make guided evolution, God's hand over it, fit into the storyline of Scripture. And if that's how God did it, if I get to heaven and I find out that's how God did it, I'll be surprised. But hey, God can do anything, right? At this point, where I'm at, I would reject that. And I want to affirm it, first of all, and say there's wonderful, much smarter than me Christians who hold to that view of kind of like an intelligent design type view. Right now where I'm at, I feel like I need to reject it. I love learning on this topic. The theory of evolution has much to explain about itself, and frankly it has very little support. While it's been adopted and held by many in the scientific community, there frankly is just very little scientific evidence to support the actual theory. While it's held by many, it's also rejected by many. Those are the voices that you don't often hear because they're the outsiders of the majority within the scientific community. But there are many scholars, both of a religious background and a non-religious background, who look at the evidence of what we're calling evolution, the theory of evolution, and they say, you know what, it just doesn't stack up, it doesn't make sense. It really does not work how Darwin thought it could possibly work. This does not mean that all Christians must reject every form of evolution, but it does mean that the verdict is still out, and that it's not unscientific to reject the theory of Darwinian evolution as we stand in humanity today. As a Bible-believing follower of Christ, I just reject it outright. And if one day we get to a place where it's so solid, scientifically proven, I'll take a better look, perhaps, at intelligent design. But when we look at the fossil record, and when we look at the great minds who look into this, it seems like we need to reject Darwinian evolution on a number of levels, but one of them, I would say, is the Bible doesn't talk about that. The Bible talks about God making each species according to its kind, and then making man separate. Secondly, the The first point being that we all have the imago Dei, the image of God. The second important point from this is that this means that every man has dignity. Every man has dignity. Every human being has inherent value and worth because of the image of God in them. No matter your color, no matter your creed, no matter your country, no matter your experience, no matter your IQ, no matter anything that might come to define who you think you are, each person has inherent dignity from a Christian worldview. To treat one person as more valuable, as more special than another person, is to reject the God of the Bible and his purpose for humanity. It rejects the imago Dei, the image of God in all of humanity. We know that from a worldview perspective, it's only Christianity that's actually able to explain why every single person across all this beautiful humanity and the beautiful entire world of people that live in different people groups around the globe all have inherent dignity. It's because the Trinitarian God of the Bible has made them in his image. Secularism is a modern worldview. They have a secularist manifesto that tries to claim that they also give dignity to all people. The problem is that they actually don't have the foundation to make that statement. They're stealing from the Christian worldview and calling it their own, but it doesn't actually have the legs to stand up to it. Let me explain what I mean by that. Friedrich Nietzsche. We've already talked about Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who kind of was the atheist philosopher who kind of really, got to a lot of good material, if you are an atheist, how you ought to view the world. He says this, talking about morality. He says, morality is a hindrance to the development of new and better customs. It makes us stupid. Here's what Nietzsche would say. Nietzsche would say, look, if you're an atheist, let's just be an atheist about it. If you believe in evolution, and you believe that the way we got here is survival of the fittest, the strong ate the weak, then we've got to bring that, in a sense, into the moral universe that we live in. The strong eat the weak. That's the way of the world. It's the natural way of the world. And to try to live a different way, to have compassion for the poor, to believe in social justice, to try to establish dignity of all people, and to reject that one person dominating or domineering over another person to say that's a bad thing, that's not the atheist world we live in. In fact, moral evolution, it would actually say strong eat the weak. It would affirm a lot of those very things that many modern-day secularists would reject. The problem is the modern-day secularist actually is trying to affirm that every human being has dignity, but they have no grounds to do it if they're coming from a theory of evolution. The Christian has the grounds to do it, because we believe every human was made in the image of God. Nietzsche is actually right. He says if you're a modern-day atheist, a modern-day secularist, and you believe in social justice, and you believe, Tim Keller says this so well, and you believe in social justice, you believe in compassion for the poor, you believe that we ought to be caring for people in their seasons of distress, then you're not a true atheist. See that? You're not a true atheist. That's not what atheism says. You're actually living out Christian values. You're just afraid to admit it. So you're living a kind of a split life, a dichotomous life. Christianity is not that way. Christianity believes in compassion, social justice, help for the poor. It believes in all those things. Why? Because each person is made in the image of God. All right, second fill-in here. Man has a mandate to be fruitful and to multiply and to fill the earth. Man has a mandate to be fruitful, to multiply, and to fill the earth. God's original design for humanity was for humanity to multiply and create society. So we're talking about before the fall right now, right? So we're not talking about all the ways this has been impacted negatively by sin. We're just talking about God's original design for humanity. We're rooting, what is our purpose? God gave man purpose. He placed him in a garden, a beautiful garden. He told him to work it, to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. In other words, they were to have babies. They were to create society. Now, what that society would have been like, we can speculate a lot. We can have a lot of ideas. Some of the great minds have kind of said, look, it wouldn't have been a society in which there was a need for government, because one of the purposes of government is to restrain sin, right? To carry the sword and restrain sin. Well, without sin, there wouldn't necessarily have been the need for government as we know it today. But there would have been family. There would have been lives being lived out in this world for the glory of God, families worshiping God, being led by the fathers of the household, and all being pointed towards God as they grow up into their glorification. There would have been society, and we had this mandate from God to be fruitful and to multiply and fill the earth. Now, what that means is that society is not a bad thing. People are not a bad thing. Worldviews that talk about, we're making too many babies, overpopulation. We can reject that. That's not from the Bible. The Bible says we need to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. If we look at common modern worldviews, we quickly see that they fail to address the question of purpose. Why are we here? And what do we do with our time here? Right? This idea that man has a mandate to be fruitful and multiply is getting at our purpose. What are we doing here? We're to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That's part of our purpose. Stephen Gould, who's a real famous, scientist, I'll just call him a scientist for right now, did a lot of work in the world of archaeology and history. He says this, Stephen Gould, "We are here because one odd group of fishes had a peculiar fin anatomy." Remember, he's an atheist. Stephen Gould, atheist. "One group of fishes had a peculiar fin anatomy that could transform into legs." Right? So one day, a fish grew legs. For terrestrial creatures, because the earth never froze entirely during an ice age, because a small and tenuous species arising in Africa 250,000 years ago has managed so far to survive by hook and crook, we may yearn for a higher answer, but none exists. Stephen Gould, put that quote up here, Stephen Gould, an ardent atheist and naturalist, refused to believe in the worldview of Scripture. And because of that, he was unable to find a purpose in life. He had no footing to actually find what are we supposed to do with our time. Again, this is a self-defeating worldview because Stephen Gould made good use of his time. He actually lived with a purpose. He was very famous. He did a lot of incredible work, but he has no reason for doing that. The Christian is the one who has a reason for doing that. We look at the fact that we were placed here with a mandate by God. Stephen Gould, like Richard Dawkins and like Friedrich Nietzsche, believes that we are here simply by random chance of history and evolution and billion years of progress that happen to put us here in this place. We are here without a purpose. But he lived as if he had a purpose. The Christian recognizes that kind of split lifestyle, that split mentality, and says you're stealing from the Christian worldview when you say you have a purpose and when you say you have a mission in this life. God is the one who has given us that. Now we're going to stay on that topic for this next point. This next point, fill in the blank. Man has a mandate to subdue the earth and to have dominion over the animals. We are to subdue the earth and have dominion over the animals. To subdue the earth means to control the earth. It means to plant crops and gardens and to bring about beauty through maintaining flowers and plants, right? It means to actually take the creation that God has made and to mold it and form it and actually create the things we need to sustain our life. To subdue the earth is to gain mastery over the earth. It is not to live in the chaos of overgrowth, but actually to bring about order, beauty, and sustenance for our life. What this means is that God has given humanity the right to take the resources from the earth that we need to survive and to build civilization and society. Right? It is not wrong to take the resources that we have in this planet, to dig them out, to harvest them, and to use them for the furtherance and the goodness of society and human civilization. It does not mean we should abuse the earth and its resources and tarnish the earth in the process. But it does mean that we don't need to feel guilty as if this is not part of our mandate from God. We are to use the resources of the earth to further society. For example, what this means, it means that rainforests are beautiful, right? Everyone would say, they look at the Amazon and they say, that is beautiful. But a well-maintained garden, beautiful flowers and order, is also a beautiful thing for humanity. Right? It's a beautiful thing to actually subdue the earth and have dominion over it. I heard one friend of mine say, a lion out in the wild is quite a majestic thing. It's amazing to see a lion out in the wild. They're just raw creatures of power. But it's also not wrong to see a lion in a zoo, to have dominion over the animals. They are not to rule over us. We are not to harm them for the sake of just, brute harming them and for no other purpose, but it is not wrong to exercise dominion over the animals. We have a wonderful stewardship here that God has given us, and we ought to care for the world we live in as stewards. And yet, the natural world is also God's provision for us to live in and build society. We're stewards of God's resources, and all the other animals, we exercise dominion over them. That means caring for them, but also using what we need to build up our lives. But we're also to care for His world. It's not wrong, and I'm sharing some of these worldviews because I hear these oftentimes come in, especially with the kind of save the planet worldview. I don't have a particular quote I'm going to pull out here. But there's a worldview that says that we've got to avoid any form of, harming the planet, as if every tree we cut down is wrong, is somehow a sin. That's not true. It's not wrong to cut a tree down to build a home. God told us to subdue the earth. And we need to live in homes in order to subdue the earth. And that's not wrong. It is wrong to just go ahead and, completely burn down rainforests for no sake, for no purpose whatsoever. That would be wrong. But it's not wrong to take the resources that we need. Christians ought to be leading voices for making sure that humanity does not abuse God's good creation. We ought to be leading the way to make sure that we don't abuse creation because we're stewards. But we also do not need to fear that using the resources of God's creation to sustain human life is somehow bad and inherently evil. It's not. It's not. God gave us the command. Having dominion over the animals means that we're superior to other animals. We are to care for them. We are to make sure that we are not just abusing them, but we're also to use them according to their purposes. So again, third point, man has a mandate to subdue the earth and to have dominion over the animals. This one's a fun one. Next point, man was originally a vegetarian. Man was originally a vegetarian. All right, so you probably noticed this when I read that passage. God gave all the green plants to all the animals and to man to eat. He did not originally give meat to everybody. Before the fall, before sin entered the world, man and animal lived in harmony with one another. Death did not rule in the creation that God had made. Rather, life ruled over creation. Man had no fear of tigers. Neither did lambs have fear of wolves. You get that? Right? All of creation was living together. The fall disrupted that shalom. It disrupted that peace. And since the fall, animals have turned against animal, as well as against man. That's one of the reasons in the Noahic covenant, the covenant that God makes with Noah, he tells Noah, if any animal takes the life of a man, the life of the animal will be required, because the whole order has been disrupted as a result of sin. In other words, natural selection, let me counter some claims here. Under evolution, the idea of natural selection, that one species basically dominated over another species and wiped them out, right? Strong eat the weak. Natural selection did not have any place in the Garden of Eden. That's not how it worked in the Garden of Eden. There was no strong eat weak in the Garden of Eden. God's design was one of peace. That's where we started from. This is one of the reasons I would reject evolution, the idea of natural selection. That's just not how it was in Eden. It didn't work that way there. However, we must recognize that in the future glorification of all that is, there will be a restoration of the original shalom. So remember, that's what Eden was like. Now let me read to you about what is coming. We read this in Isaiah 11, verse 6 to 9. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and a little child will lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the water covers the sea. All right, so what do we do with this? Yes, it is true that in the pre-fall state, man was a vegetarian. That is true. But it's also true that since sin has entered into the world, God has given all animals, right? He has given animals, not all animals, he has given animals as food. He's permitted man to eat meat. After the flood, in Genesis 9, chapter 1, it says, "And God blessed Noah and his sons. He said to them, be fruitful and multiply." Notice the repetition of that. "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. As I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life." In other words, don't eat an animal that still is breathing, still has a heartbeat. "But you shall not eat flesh with its life." Why? Because that would not be to exercise stewardship and dominion over animals, to be eating animals while they're alive. That's cruel and unusual. So he says, do not eat flesh with its life. That is its blood. Now, let's look at some modern worldviews. There's a modern worldview. I'm going to summarize it as veganism. But frankly, that's probably the wrong term. There's probably another term for it. But veganism, many folks who fight for the rights of animals. For example, on one vegan fund page, I'm going to pull this picture up here for you. I was going through websites for vegans, and I came across this. One vegan fund website, there's a picture of a man, it's up here behind me, and the t-shirt that he's wearing says this: "Animals are not ours to eat, wear, or use." Animals are not ours to eat, wear, or use. So what's his worldview? His worldview is that we are not to eat any animals. And if you keep going through why, it's because they see the special nature of animals, that they are just like us. They see really no distinction between all the animals of God. Humanity is not in a place of domination over the animals. Rather, humanity is really equal with the animals. And so who are we to eat an animal? Who are we to use an animal? Who are we to wear any products from an animal? That would all be wrong and considered sinful from that worldview. Now, from a biblical perspective, there is truth and there is falsity built into what that says. What is true is that there is a heart behind this movement, right? There's a heart behind this movement that in some ways could have some good things in it. To make sure, just like Christians should care for the environment, make sure we're just not abusing it, Christians should care for animals in a way that says we're not just abusing them. We shouldn't maliciously, for the sake of just being cruel and unusual, kill animals. That would not be being a good steward or domineering over the animals in a way that God would have us do. At the same time, it's false what they're saying. Animals are given to us to eat. God gave us animals to eat. So no Christian should have a guilty conscience for eating meat. Animals are ours for using. It's wonderful to use animals for their strength. In fact, many animals have been given to us for that purpose. Animals to help us farm, animals to help us plow, animals to help us get around. Animals have many wonderful purposes that should be used by people. And animals have been given to us to wear. It's not wrong to wear, sheep. That's not wrong at all. God has given us these animals for a purpose, and we are told that we are able to eat them. Now, what does this mean? By way of application, as a Christian, we can affirm and reject some of the movements of the animal rights movement. We love when they want to care for animals. That's good. We reject when they say that in some way we're equal with animals and that we have to, avoid all kinds of harm to animals. That's not right at all. For a Christian who chooses to be a vegetarian, some Christians actually do that on a Genesis 1 account. They go back to the Garden of Eden and say, hey, if this is how God made us originally, then I'm going to try to live that way. And what we would say to them is, go ahead. Okay, if that's your conviction, you're free to do that. But someone who chooses to eat meat is also not wrong in any way. There's not sin in choosing to eat meat because God specifically told us that we are able to do it. So we mustn't judge those who choose to be vegetarian for the sake of the Scriptures, but we also must recognize that no person who eats meat should be forced to have a guilty conscience because of it. All right, last point here. Man had original righteousness. Man had original righteousness. Sorry, my throat's getting parched. All right, finally, we arrive at the condition of man's relationship to God before the fall. We call man's condition before sin entered the picture original righteousness. This is the kind of classic Reformed language, particularly that was developed by some of the more classic Reformed theologians. Original righteousness. What we mean by this is that man was in such close relationship with God that we needed no additional text. We didn't need the scriptures. We didn't need the Bible to do his will. We were in such close relationship with God that our thoughts and our minds just naturally, by the simple state of being made in the image of God, desired to know God, to worship God, to live in a right union with God. Man was not a dim-witted caveman. That's not where we came from. You got to really make sure you nail that one in. That is the history that modern textbooks would like us to know, that we were some dim-witted caveman without any sense of right or wrong. We were bashing our wives' heads with clubs. That's not what it was. That's not what it was. We were made in the image of God and in original righteousness with God. We carried out his will perfectly because we knew nothing else. There was no concept of sin in us. One of the more famous Reformed theologians, Abraham Kuyper, he says, as such, his body was unimpaired and whole, and in terms of his spiritual existence, he was perfectly wise in mind, perfectly holy in moral nature, and perfectly righteous in his standing before God. This was his state of righteousness, or original righteousness, which was inherent in his nature. Now, where we're going to go next, in the next class we teach, is we're going to talk about how all of that original righteousness got disrupted. That when sin came in, the truth that was woven into the fabric of our being, that each person that was born knew God, knew the Trinitarian God. It was woven into his fabric. That's part of being made in the image of God. That's why Romans 1 says, no man is without excuse. Part of the human condition is that deep down at the very center, there is a knowledge of the one true God and his means of salvation. It is there within each person. And yet, sin has caused us to suppress that truth. We've suppressed that truth. Our original righteousness has been suppressed, and now we live out of a place of sin. And when we talk about the problems of the world, when we talk about why the world is as harsh and as hard, and oftentimes as wicked as we see it around us today, it was not because God's original design was not good. It was because sin entered the picture and we've suppressed the truth. And now sin lives inside each human heart. And each human, each person, the only way to overcome that sin is by going to Jesus, the one who has actually been given by God to rescue the human heart from captivity to sin. Jesus, the God made flesh, second person of the Trinity, hung on a cross in our place, substituting himself, that we would have life and a restoration of the shalom that God originally designed us for. He's the one who restores us to a place of actually having a righteousness, which at this point we have his righteousness covering us when we believe in Christ. All right? 5 points there. Now, once again, as I close this, here's what I want to say. In some ways, I dealt with some joking worldviews here today. There's, not in a joking manner, but some worldviews that we might kind of flippantly laugh at, such as the vegan t-shirt. But what I want you to see is that these are real worldviews that are out there in the marketplace of ideas that you're coming across on a day-to-day basis. And once again, I want you to root yourself in the Scriptures, to know that the life you live is actually, if you're a Christian, it's built on very solid rock. The world we live in of moral agency and consciousness and understanding right from wrong and the dignity of all mankind and living an ordered life where we live in this world and we can use its resources appropriately, that's Christianity. That's where you get all that from. To try to say you want all those things but you take the God away is to build a house on a foundation that actually doesn't make any sense. I want you to be able to look at worldviews around you and to interpret them and to know that you can have confidence and courage in the convictions of your Christian faith.